Look, I knew this day would come eventually. I've been waiting for it, actually. My mother Cheryl has been pulling manipulative garbage like this my entire adult life, and I spent the last 3 years since I got engaged, preparing for whatever nuclear option she'd choose for my wedding day. I just didn't expect her to be this bold about it in front of 200 people. Some backstory, because this didn't come out of nowhere. My mother has always been the type who needs to be the center of attention no matter what. When I was growing up, she'd find ways to make every birthday, every achievement, every moment about her somehow. My high school graduation, she showed up drunk and started crying loudly about how proud she was, making such a scene that people were staring at her instead of the ceremony. My college acceptance letter, she posted it on Facebook before I even saw it, making it all about her being such an amazing mother who raised a smart son. But the real issues started when I began dating my now wife Sadie 3 years ago. Sadie comes from a stable family with money. Her parents own a successful business, and they're genuinely good people who welcomed me immediately. My mother couldn't handle that Sadie wasn't impressed by her drama and manipulation tactics. Sadie would just give her these polite smiles and refuse to engage when Cheryl would try to start conflicts or fish for attention. The first major red flag was when I told my mother I was proposing. Instead of being happy, she immediately started asking invasive questions about Sadie's family wealth, making comments about how I was probably just marrying her for money, and then had the nerve to suggest that maybe I wasn't ready for marriage yet. When I told her to back off, she switched tactics and started love-bombing me, talking about how she just wanted what was best for me and didn't want to see me get hurt. Then came the engagement party that Sadie's parents threw for us. Nothing too fancy, just close family and friends at a nice restaurant. My mother showed up an hour late wearing this completely inappropriate, attention-grabbing outfit, proceeded to drink too much, and spent the entire evening making passive-aggressive comments about the venue being too expensive and how some families just like to show off their money. She cornered several of Sadie's relatives and started telling them embarrassing stories about my childhood that nobody asked to hear. But here's what really made me start planning my defense strategy. About 6 months ago, my mother started getting increasingly desperate for attention as the wedding planning ramped up. She'd call me multiple times a day with emergencies that turned out to be nothing. She'd show up unannounced at our apartment claiming she was in the neighborhood and just wanted to see how we were doing. She started making demands about the wedding guest list, wanting to invite people I hadn't spoken to in years, and threw an actual tantrum when I told her no. The final straw was 2 months ago when she tried to go behind my back to the wedding venue to make changes to our reception menu without our permission. When the event coordinator called me confused about the conflicting instructions, I realized my mother had been telling people she was the mother of the bride and had equal say in all decisions. I had to have a very direct conversation with her about boundaries, and that's when she got really ugly about it. She started making these vague threats about how she knew things about me that would embarrass me in front of Sadie's family, how she had information that could make people see me differently. I knew she was fishing and trying to manipulate me into giving her more control over the wedding, but it confirmed what I'd suspected for months. She was planning something big for the wedding day itself, so I started preparing. I won't go into all the details yet, but let's just say I've been doing some research of my own into my mother's life, and I found some very interesting information that she definitely doesn't want becoming public knowledge. Information that would be absolutely devastating to her reputation and her relationships. I've been sitting on this for months, waiting to see if she'd actually follow through with whatever scheme she was cooking up. Fast forward to last Saturday. The ceremony went perfectly, thank God. My mother behaved herself during the actual wedding, probably because it was in a church and she knew she couldn't cause a scene there without looking completely unhinged. But I could see her getting more agitated as the day went on, especially during the cocktail hour when people kept complimenting Sadie and talking about how beautiful everything was. The reception started fine. Dinner went well, people were having a good time, and my best man, Paul, was getting ready to give his speech. Paul and I have been friends since college. He's a good guy who was just planning to tell some funny stories about our friendship and wish us well. Nothing controversial, nothing embarrassing. Paul had been speaking for maybe 3 minutes when the doors to the reception hall burst open and my mother came charging in, not walking quickly, not hurrying to her seat, but literally storming across the room toward the head table where the microphone was. The entire room went quiet immediately because her body language was so aggressive and purposeful. She walked right up to Paul, who was standing there with the microphone looking completely confused, and just grabbed it out of his hands. Paul tried to protest, but she physically pushed past him and turned to face the room full of guests. The look on her face was pure rage mixed with this sick satisfaction, like she'd been waiting for this moment for months. Then she started talking, and the first words out of her mouth were directed straight at me. She said I had exactly 30 seconds to wire $20,000 to her account, or she was going to tell everyone in this room some very interesting facts about my character. Just like that, in front of everyone, trying to extort money from me at my own wedding reception. But she wasn't done. She started making all these wild accusations, claiming I had been visiting strip clubs every Thursday for months, that I had some secret social media account where I was sending inappropriate pictures to college students, that there was a 19-year-old girl who was pregnant and I was the father. She said she had text message screenshots proving I was trying to pay for an abortion. The room was dead silent. Sadie's parents looked horrified. My new wife was staring at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Some of the older relatives from both sides looked like they were about to have heart attacks. My mother-in-law actually had to sit down because she looked like she might faint, and my mother just kept going. She was holding up her phone, claiming she had all this evidence, that she'd already sent emails to my boss, that she was going to post everything on social media if I didn't pay her immediately. She gave me this ultimatum, 30 seconds to transfer the money, or she'd destroy my marriage and my reputation in front of everyone. Here's the thing, though. I knew this was coming. Maybe not exactly this scenario, but I knew she was planning to try to destroy my wedding day somehow. And more importantly, I knew she was lying about everything. The strip clubs, the social media account, the pregnant girl, all of it complete fiction. She'd made up this entire story because she was desperate for attention and control. But what she didn't know is that I've spent months preparing for this exact moment. While she was cooking up lies about me, I was uncovering the truth about her. And let me tell you, the truth about my mother is so much worse than anything she could make up about me. So I stood up slowly, walked over to where she was standing with the microphone, and looked out at all 200 guests. I could see the videographer was still recording everything, which was perfect because I wanted this documented. Then I smiled at my mother and told her that since she wanted to play this game in front of everyone, I had my own story to share. The look of confusion and then growing panic on her face when I said that was incredible. She started to realize that maybe she'd made a mistake, that maybe I wasn't going to just collapse under her manipulation like I had when I was younger. She tried to interrupt me and take back control, but I kept talking. I told everyone that my mother was absolutely right about one thing. There were definitely some secrets that needed to come out at this wedding, but they weren't about me. They were about her. And what I was about to reveal would explain exactly why she was so desperate for money and so determined to destroy my happiness. That's when she dropped the microphone and grabbed my arm, begging me not to say whatever I was about to say. She kept whispering, "No, please, not that, oh God, not that," over and over. But I'd made my decision months ago. The moment she chose to try to destroy my wedding day with lies and manipulation, I was going to tell everyone the truth about who she really is. The room was completely silent, waiting to hear what I was going to say next. Sadie was looking back and forth between me and my mother, trying to understand what was happening. My new in-laws probably thought they'd married their daughter into some kind of criminal family based on the money demands and accusations flying around. But I was just getting started. What I revealed next about my mother's secret life completely changed how everyone in that room saw her. And more importantly, it explained exactly why she was so desperate for money and so willing to destroy her own son's wedding. To get it, I'll post the update tomorrow about what happened next because honestly I need to process some of the fallout that's still happening. Let's just say my mother's threats about destroying my reputation didn't exactly go according to her plan. Update 1. Alright everyone, thanks for all the comments and messages on my original post. A lot of you were asking what my mother's big secret was and how I found out about it. Some of you guessed pretty close to the truth actually. Before I get into what happened next at the reception, I need to explain how I discovered what my mother has really been up to. So remember how I mentioned that my mother started making these vague threats about having information that could embarrass me? That got me thinking about why she was suddenly so desperate for control and attention, especially when it came to my relationship with Sadie. It didn't make sense that she'd be this hostile towards someone who had never done anything to her. About 4 months ago, I decided to do some digging. I started by talking to my Aunt Riley, my mother's sister, who lives across the country. Riley and my mother used to be close, but had some kind of falling out about 2 years ago that nobody ever explained to me. When I called Riley and asked her directly what happened between them, she was hesitant at first, but eventually told me some very interesting things. Turns out my mother had been borrowing money from Riley regularly for over a year. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, always with sob stories about unexpected expenses or emergencies. But then the amounts got bigger and the stories got more elaborate. Riley said my mother claimed she needed money for medical bills, car repairs, help with rent, you name it. Riley estimated she'd lent my mother close to $8,000 over 18 months. But here's the kicker. Riley found out through a mutual friend that my mother had been posting photos on social media of expensive purchases during the same time periods she was claiming to be broke and borrowing money. New clothes, fancy dinners, weekend trips to casinos. Riley confronted her about it, and my mother completely lost it, accusing Riley of being jealous and unsupportive. They haven't spoken since. That conversation with Riley made me start looking more closely at my mother's social media activity and spending patterns. I also reached out to a few other relatives I hadn't talked to in a while, just casual catch-up conversations. But I'd steer the topic toward family and see what people would say about my mother. What I discovered was that my mother had been running the same scam on multiple family members. My cousin Stephen had lent her money for what she claimed was help with property taxes. My uncle Frederick had given her cash for what she said was an emergency dental procedure. She'd been telling everyone different stories, but always needing money urgently, and always promising to pay it back quickly. But the gambling thing was just part of it. The really damaging stuff was what I found out she'd been doing specifically about Sadie and her family. Remember how I mentioned that Sadie's family has money and owns a successful business? Well, my mother had been telling relatives for months that Sadie's family was involved in shady business practices. She was spreading rumors that they were tax evaders, that their money came from questionable sources, that they looked down on our family because we weren't wealthy enough. She'd been poisoning family relationships by telling people that Sadie was controlling and manipulative, that she was isolating me from my family, that the wedding was just a way for Sadie's parents to show off their wealth. She was basically trying to turn our entire extended family against my future wife and in-laws before they even met them. The worst part was discovering that she'd been intercepting some of our wedding RSVPs. Several relatives told me they'd never received invitations, and when I checked with our wedding planner, somehow a bunch of addresses had been marked as invalid in our system. My mother had volunteered to help with addressing envelopes early in the planning process, and apparently she'd been sabotaging invitations to people she thought might not support her narrative about Sadie's family. So by the time my mother decided to blow up at the wedding reception, I'd already spent months gathering evidence of her lies, her financial manipulation of family members, and her deliberate attempts to sabotage my relationship. I'd been sitting on this information waiting to see exactly how far she'd take her manipulation. Now back to the wedding reception. So there I am standing in front of 200 people. My mother is begging me not to reveal whatever secret I'm about to share. And everyone is waiting to hear what could possibly be more scandalous than the accusations she just made about me. I looked directly at her and told everyone that my mother was absolutely desperate for $20,000, but not for any emergency or legitimate reason. I said she'd been gambling away her savings at casinos for the past 2 years and had borrowed money from at least 6 different family members under false pretenses, never paying any of it back. The look on her face when I said that was incredible. Pure panic mixed with rage. She immediately started trying to interrupt me, saying that wasn't true, that I was making things up to deflect from my own problems. But I kept talking. I told everyone that she'd been lying to relatives about Sadie and her family for months, spreading rumors about their business being shady and claiming they were snobs who looked down on us. I said she'd been actively trying to sabotage our wedding by intercepting invitations because she wanted fewer people there to witness Sadie's family's generosity and kindness. Then I pulled out my phone and started reading some of the text messages she'd sent to various relatives. Messages where she called Sadie a gold digger, where she claimed Sadie's parents were probably money laundering through their business, where she said I was being manipulated and controlled. I read them word for word with my mother standing right there. The room was dead silent except for a few gasps from some of the older relatives who were recognizing their own names in the messages I was reading. My Aunt Riley, who had flown in for the wedding despite everything, was nodding along because she'd heard all of this before directly from my mother. But my mother wasn't about to go down without a fight. She grabbed the microphone back from me and started yelling that I was twisting everything, that she was just trying to protect me from making a mistake, that everything she'd said about Sadie's family was true, and I was too blinded by love to see it. She turned to address Sadie's parents directly and started making even more wild accusations. She claimed she had evidence that their business had been investigated for tax evasion, that they'd been bribing local officials to get permits, that they were using their wealth to buy their way out of legal problems. None of this was true, of course, but she was desperate and doubling down. Sadie's father stood up at this point and very calmly told my mother that he'd be happy to provide her with documentation of their business practices and tax filings if she was genuinely concerned, but that making false accusations at a wedding reception was inappropriate and hurtful. His response was so measured and dignified compared to my mother's hysterical ranting that it made her look even more unhinged. That's when my mother made her biggest mistake. She turned back to the crowd and announced that she was going to prove everything she'd said about me was true. She said she had screenshots and evidence, and she was going to post it all on social media right now for everyone to see. She started frantically tapping on her phone, trying to access whatever fake evidence she thought she had. But here's the thing. I knew she was bluffing about having any evidence against me because I knew I hadn't done any of the things she was accusing me of. So I just stood there and waited while she fumbled with her phone, getting more agitated and desperate as she realized she couldn't produce whatever fake screenshots she thought she had ready. Meanwhile, several relatives were taking out their own phones and very obviously recording everything. My mother's public meltdown, her false accusations against Sadie's family, her frantic attempts to produce evidence that didn't exist. All of it was being documented by people who now knew the truth about her gambling debts and lies. After about 5 minutes of watching her struggle with her phone and make increasingly wild claims, I took the microphone back and made an announcement to everyone. I said that given the circumstances, Sadie and I were going to continue our reception as planned, and anyone who wanted to stay and celebrate with us was welcome. But anyone who felt uncomfortable or wanted to leave was free to do so with no hard feelings. Most people stayed, actually. Sadie's family and friends rallied around us immediately, and several of my relatives came up to apologize for my mother's behavior and to thank me for finally telling the truth about what she'd been doing. But my mother wasn't done yet. She spent the next hour trying to corner individual guests and convince them that I was lying about her, that she really did have evidence against me, that this was all some elaborate setup. She was going from table to table, making increasingly desperate attempts to salvage the situation. The breaking point came when she approached Sadie's grandmother, who's in her 80s and was just trying to enjoy her dinner. My mother started showing her phone to this elderly woman and demanding that she look at some fake screenshots, getting increasingly aggressive when Sadie's grandmother politely tried to decline. That's when I'd had enough. I walked over and very firmly told my mother that she needed to leave immediately, or I would have security escort her out. She looked at me with pure hatred and said that this wasn't over, that she had ways to make both me and Sadie pay for humiliating her. But the most chilling part was what she said next. She looked directly at Sadie and told her that she had no idea what kind of family she was marrying into, that there were things about our family history that would horrify her, and that she'd make sure Sadie learned every detail. Then she gathered up her purse and stormed out, but not before announcing loudly that she was going to make sure everyone we knew learned the truth about what had really happened. She said she was going to tell her version of events to anyone who would listen, and that we'd regret trying to destroy her reputation. Here's where things have gotten complicated since the wedding. My mother has been true to her word about trying to control the narrative. She's been calling relatives, posting on social media, and apparently even reaching out to some of Sadie's extended family members, trying to convince them that I set her up and that everything she said about Sadie's family is true. But the really concerning part is that she's been escalating her contact attempts with us. She's been calling and texting constantly, alternating between apologies and threats. Sometimes she's begging for forgiveness and claiming she was just stressed about money. Other times, she's doubling down on her accusations and promising to expose more family secrets. Yesterday, she left a voicemail that was genuinely disturbing. She said she'd been doing more research into Sadie's family business and had found information that would be very damaging if it became public. She claimed she had connections who could cause serious problems for their business relationships and that she was prepared to use them if we didn't agree to sit down and work this out. The thing is, I'm not even sure if she's bluffing anymore. She's proven that she's willing to lie and manipulate to get what she wants, and she's clearly desperate. Sadie is starting to get worried about what my mother might be capable of, and honestly, so am I. What's really frustrating is that some relatives are starting to believe my mother's version of events. She's good at playing the victim and making it seem like I'm the one who's being cruel and vindictive. She's telling people that she was just trying to look out for me and that I humiliated her at my own wedding out of spite. I'm starting to realize that exposing her at the reception was just the beginning of this conflict, not the end of it. She's not backing down or accepting consequences for her behavior. Instead, she's doubling down and escalating her attempts to control the narrative and damage our relationships. Tomorrow, I'm going to share what's been happening since the wedding and the new tactics she's been using to try to manipulate the situation. Let's just say her voicemail threats about having damaging information aren't as empty as I initially thought they were. Update 2. So, the situation with my mother has gotten significantly worse since my last update. A lot of you were asking about those voicemail threats she made about having damaging information, and unfortunately, it turns out she wasn't completely bluffing. But before I get into that, I need to explain what's been happening over the past few days and why my mother is so obsessed with destroying my relationship with Sadie. The day after the wedding, my mother launched what I can only describe as a full-scale character assassination campaign. She wasn't just calling our immediate family anymore. She'd somehow gotten hold of contact information for Sadie's extended family, her parents' business associates, even some of our mutual friends from college. She was reaching out to anyone she could find and telling them her version of what happened at the wedding. But here's the thing that really shows how calculated she's being about this. She wasn't telling everyone the same story. She was tailoring her lies based on who she was talking to. When she called Sadie's aunt, she focused on how I was financially irresponsible and had a gambling problem just like her. When she reached out to one of Sadie's father's business partners, she claimed that our family had connections to questionable people and that associating with us could damage their reputation. The most disturbing call was the one she made to Sadie's younger sister, Piper. Piper is only 22 and still pretty naive about family drama. My mother somehow tracked down Piper's number and called her pretending to be concerned about Sadie's well-being. She told Piper that I had a history of manipulative behavior, that I'd isolated Sadie from friends before, and that the whole wedding confrontation was something I'd planned to make my mother look bad because she'd tried to warn Sadie about my character. Piper actually believed some of it at first. She called Sadie crying and asking if everything was okay in our marriage, if I was controlling her, if she felt safe. It took Sadie over an hour to calm her sister down and explain what had really happened. But the damage was done. Now Piper is scared of my mother and worried that she might try to contact her again with more lies. That's when I realized my mother wasn't just having a breakdown or acting out of desperation. This was strategic. She was systematically trying to isolate us from our support systems by poisoning our relationships with lies tailored to each person's specific concerns and vulnerabilities. So I decided it was time to escalate my own response. Remember how I mentioned that I had been gathering information about my mother for months? Well, I hadn't revealed everything at the wedding reception. I'd been saving some of the more damaging stuff for exactly this kind of situation. Here's what I hadn't told anyone yet. My mother's gambling problem is actually much worse than I initially revealed. Through my conversations with relatives and some digging into public records, I discovered that she'd taken out multiple personal loans over the past year. She owes money to at least 3 different lending companies, and she's behind on payments for all of them. The $20,000 she demanded at the wedding wasn't just to pay back family members. She's in serious financial trouble. But the really devastating information I'd found was about why she hates Sadie so much. It's not just jealousy or attention-seeking behavior. There's a specific reason she's been so determined to destroy my relationship. And it goes back to something that happened when I first started dating Sadie 3 years ago. When I introduced Sadie to my mother for the first time, my mother immediately started asking invasive questions about Sadie's family background. She wanted to know about their business, their financial situation, their social connections. At the time, I thought she was just being her usual nosy self, but it turns out she had a specific agenda. My mother had been struggling financially even back then, though she was hiding it from everyone. When she learned that Sadie's family was well off and owned a successful business, she started fantasizing about ways to benefit from that connection. She actually thought that marrying into Sadie's family would solve her money problems. She expected that Sadie's parents would help our family financially, maybe even bring me into their business as a way of helping their new son-in-law. When it became clear that Sadie's family, while generous and kind, wasn't going to hand out money or job opportunities just because I was dating their daughter, my mother became resentful. She started viewing Sadie as selfish for not using her family's wealth to help us. In my mother's twisted logic, Sadie was being cruel by not immediately sharing her family's resources with people who needed them more. This is why my mother had been spreading rumors about Sadie's family being snobs who looked down on us. She genuinely believed that they were withholding help out of arrogance rather than understanding that normal, healthy families don't just hand out money to their children's romantic partners. I learned all of this through a series of conversations with different relatives who my mother had tried to recruit into her campaign against Sadie. She'd been telling people for months that Sadie's family thought they were better than us, that they were probably laughing at our financial struggles behind our backs, that Sadie was being influenced by her parents to keep me at a distance from their wealth. So when I decided to escalate my response to her current campaign, I knew exactly what pressure points to target. I started reaching out to the same people she'd been contacting. But instead of defending myself, I went on the offensive. I called my Uncle Frederick, who my mother had borrowed money from for her fake dental emergency. I told him exactly how much she owed to lending companies and suggested that maybe he should ask for his money back before she declared bankruptcy. I mentioned that she'd been posting photos of casino trips on social media during the same time period she was claiming to be broke and borrowing money from family. I reached out to my cousin Stephen and told him about all the other family members she'd borrowed money from with similar sob stories. I suggested that maybe they should all compare notes about exactly how much she owed collectively and whether any of her emergency stories had been true. But the most effective pressure I applied was with my Aunt Riley. I told Riley about my mother's campaign to spread lies about Sadie's family to their business associates and relatives. Riley was furious. She said that trying to damage an innocent family's reputation because of personal grudges was unforgivable, and she was going to make sure other relatives knew exactly what my mother was doing. Within 2 days, my mother's support network had completely collapsed. The relatives she'd been counting on to believe her victim narrative were now comparing stories and realizing the extent of her lies and manipulation. Uncle Frederick demanded his money back immediately. Cousin Stephen started calling other family members to warn them about my mother's borrowing schemes. Riley sent a group text to several relatives explaining my mother's current campaign against Sadie's family and asking them to ignore any calls or messages from her. That's when my mother made her biggest mistake. Instead of backing down or trying to apologize, she doubled down on her threats about family secrets. She called me directly for the first time since the wedding, and we had a conversation that lasted over an hour. I recorded the whole thing because I knew she'd try to lie about what was said later. She started by trying to play the victim, claiming that I was being cruel and vindictive by turning family members against her. She said she was just trying to protect me from making a mistake with Sadie and that everything she'd done came from a place of love and concern. When I pointed out that love and concern don't usually involve spreading lies about innocent people or borrowing money under false pretenses, she switched tactics. She started making threats about exposing family secrets that would embarrass me and hurt my relationship with Sadie. But here's where she made her fatal error. She actually told me what secrets she was referring to. She threatened to tell Sadie about some embarrassing things I'd done as a teenager, some family financial problems we'd had when I was in college, and some arguments I'd had with relatives over the years. Basically, she was threatening to reveal normal family drama and present it as evidence that I was a terrible person. The problem with her threat was that none of this information was actually damaging or secret. Sadie already knew about most of it because I'd told her myself during the 3 years we'd been together. The financial problems my mother was threatening to expose were largely caused by her own spending and poor decisions. The family arguments she was going to reveal were mostly about her behavior. So I told her that if she wanted to share embarrassing family information, I had plenty of my own to share. I started listing some of the things I'd discovered about her financial situation and her borrowing schemes. I mentioned that I had text message screenshots of her lies about various family members, including messages where she called Sadie horrible names and made false accusations about her character. I told her that if she continued her campaign to damage our relationships, I would make sure that everyone she'd ever borrowed money from knew exactly how much she owed and where that money had actually gone. I said I would share her social media posts, showing expensive purchases with timestamps proving they were made during periods when she was claiming to be broke and needing emergency funds. That's when she completely lost it. She started screaming that I was an ungrateful son who didn't understand everything she'd sacrificed for me, that Sadie had turned me against my own family, that she was going to make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. But then she said something that made me realize this conflict was far from over. She told me that she'd been in contact with someone who had real information about Sadie's family business, someone who could cause serious problems for their reputation and their relationships with clients. She claimed this person owed her a favor and was willing to help her cause trouble for Sadie's family if I didn't agree to sit down and work out our differences. I'm not sure if she's bluffing about having someone willing to help her, but given everything else she's been willing to do, I can't afford to ignore the threat. She's already proven that she's willing to lie and manipulate to get what she wants, and she seems to view this as a war that she's determined to win. The call ended with her giving me an ultimatum. She wants me to meet with her this weekend to discuss our relationship and my marriage. She claims she's willing to apologize and make things right, but only if I agree to hear her out and consider her concerns about Sadie. If I refuse to meet with her, she says she's going to release whatever damaging information she thinks she has about Sadie's family. I know it's probably a trap. She's trying to get me into a situation where she can manipulate me face to face and try to convince me that she's the victim in all of this. But I'm also curious about what she thinks she knows about Sadie's family and who this mysterious person is who supposedly owes her a favor. Sadie thinks I should ignore the ultimatum and let my mother do whatever she's going to do. She's confident that her family has nothing to hide and that any lies my mother spreads will eventually be exposed as false. But I'm worried that even false information can do real damage to people's reputations and relationships. I'm planning to meet with my mother, but I'm going to be prepared for whatever manipulation tactics she tries to use. I've got my own ultimatum ready for her, and it's going to make her previous threats look like nothing compared to what I'm prepared to reveal if she doesn't back down completely. Part 4 will be about that meeting and what happened when I finally gave my mother the choice between ending her campaign or facing the full consequences of everything I know about her life. Final update. So I met with my mother yesterday, and this whole situation is finally over. A lot of you were telling me not to meet with her, that it was obviously a trap, but I knew I had to see this through to the end. I'd been planning for this confrontation for months, and I wasn't going to let her manipulation tactics derail me now. We met at a coffee shop that she suggested, which was her first mistake. She picked a place where she thought she'd have the advantage because it was public and she could play the victim if I got angry. What she didn't realize was that I wanted witnesses for what I was about to do. She showed up 20 minutes late, which was typical attention-seeking behavior. She walked in looking like she'd been crying, wearing this sad expression like she was the wronged party in all of this. She sat down across from me and immediately started with her victim routine. She began by saying that she'd been devastated by how I'd treated her at the wedding, that she never expected her own son to humiliate her in front of the entire family. She claimed that everything she'd done was out of love and concern for my well-being, that she was just trying to protect me from making a mistake with Sadie. I let her talk for about 10 minutes, just listening to her rehearsed speech about how hurt she was and how she just wanted to repair our relationship. She was good at it, I'll give her that. If I didn't know the truth about her motivations and behavior, I might have actually felt sorry for her. Then she started making demands disguised as requests. She wanted me to apologize to her publicly for embarrassing her at the wedding. She wanted me to tell the family members I'd spoken to that I'd exaggerated about her financial situation and that she wasn't as bad with money as I'd made her seem. She wanted me to convince Sadie to give her another chance and to stop holding grudges about the wedding incident. But the biggest demand was that she wanted to be included in our marriage decisions going forward. She said that as my mother, she deserved to have input about major choices we made, especially financial ones. She claimed that Sadie's family had too much influence over us and that I needed someone looking out for my interests who understood our family background. When I asked her what she meant by that, she started making the same false claims about Sadie's family that she'd been spreading to relatives. She said they were snobs who looked down on us, that they were probably using their wealth to control our relationship, that they'd never accept me as truly part of their family because of our financial differences. That's when I decided it was time to stop playing along with her manipulation. I told her that I knew exactly why she was so obsessed with Sadie's family and their money. I said I knew about her expectations that they would financially support us, about her resentment when they didn't immediately offer handouts, about her twisted belief that they owed us something just because I was dating their daughter. She tried to deny it at first, claiming that I was misunderstanding her concerns and that she'd never expected anything from Sadie's family. But I kept pushing. I told her that I'd spoken to multiple relatives about the conversations she'd had with them over the past 3 years. I said I knew about her comments that Sadie's family should be helping us more, about her complaints that they were selfish for not sharing their wealth. That's when she finally dropped the victim act and got angry. She said that yes, she did think Sadie's family should be more generous with us. She claimed that rich people had a responsibility to help those who were less fortunate, especially when they were going to be family. She said it was cruel and arrogant for them to flaunt their wealth while knowing that we were struggling financially. I pointed out that we weren't actually struggling financially. I have a good job, we have our own apartment, we're doing fine. The only person in our family who was struggling with money was her, because of her gambling and poor financial decisions. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She got defensive and started claiming that her financial problems weren't her fault. She said that she'd had unexpected expenses, that she'd been dealing with stress and needed outlets like gambling to cope, that everyone was being unfair to her about money because they didn't understand her situation. She said that if Sadie's family really cared about me, they would want to help my mother too. She claimed that their refusal to offer financial assistance to her was proof that they didn't truly accept me as part of their family. She actually said that a truly loving family would want to help their future son-in-law's mother when she was going through a difficult time. I realized that she genuinely believed this. In her mind, marrying into a wealthy family meant that everyone connected to me should benefit financially. She saw Sadie's family's boundaries around money as personal rejection rather than normal, healthy behavior. So I decided it was time to reveal the information I'd been saving for this moment. I told her that I'd done extensive research into her financial situation and that I knew exactly how much trouble she was really in. I said I knew about the personal loans from multiple lending companies, about the mounting interest and late fees, about the fact that she was probably going to have to declare bankruptcy within the next few months if she didn't get help. The look on her face when I said that was incredible. She went completely pale and started asking how I could possibly know about her private financial information. I explained that I'd been piecing it together from public record, from conversations with relatives she'd borrowed money from, and from patterns in her behavior and spending. Then I told her about the real consequences she was going to face for her campaign against Sadie and her family. I said that I'd documented all of her lies and manipulation attempts, that I had recordings of our phone conversations, that I had screenshots of her social media posts and text messages. I explained that I'd already shared this information with every relative she'd borrowed money from, and that they were now comparing notes about her lies and schemes. I told her that Uncle Frederick was demanding immediate repayment of his loan and was considering pursuing legal options if she couldn't pay. I said that Cousin Stephen was warning other family members not to lend her money because of her history of false emergency stories. But the real bombshell was what I told her next. I said that I'd been in contact with the lending company she owed money to, and that I'd informed them about her campaign of harassment against my wife's family. I explained that I'd provided them with evidence that she was spending time and energy on vindictive activities instead of focusing on repaying her debts or finding legitimate ways to improve her financial situation. I told her that one of the loan companies had already flagged her account for review based on the information I'd provided. They were questioning whether someone who was actively harassing people and spreading lies was a reliable borrower who could be trusted to prioritize debt repayment. The look of panic on her face was everything I'd been waiting for. She started begging me not to interfere with her financial obligations, claiming that I was trying to ruin her life out of spite. She said that involving her creditors in our family drama was cruel and vindictive. That's when I gave her my ultimatum. I told her that she had exactly one chance to end this situation on terms that wouldn't completely destroy her. She could immediately stop all contact with Sadie's family members, friends, and business associates. She could call back every relative she'd lied to and admit that she'd exaggerated or fabricated her claims about both me and Sadie's family. She could publicly apologize for her behavior at the wedding and take full responsibility for her actions. If she did all of that within the next week, I would consider not sharing additional information about her financial situation with her creditors or with other family members who might still be willing to help her. But if she continued her campaign or made any more threats, I would make sure that everyone she'd ever borrowed money from knew exactly how she'd been spending their loans and what her real priorities were. She tried to negotiate at first, claiming that some of my demands were unreasonable and that she shouldn't have to humiliate herself by admitting to lies that weren't really lies but just misunderstandings. She said that calling relatives to retract her statements would make her look foolish and unstable. I told her that looking foolish was the least of her problems. I said that her choice was between temporary embarrassment and complete financial and social destruction. I explained that I had enough documented evidence of her lies and manipulation to ensure that no family member would ever trust her again, and that her creditors would have serious questions about her character and priorities. She sat there in silence for several minutes, probably trying to figure out if I was bluffing or if there was some way she could manipulate her way out of the situation. Finally, she asked what would happen if she did everything I'd demanded. Would I guarantee that this would be the end of our conflict and that I wouldn't use the information I had against her in the future? I told her that if she followed through completely and immediately, and if she never contacted or harassed Sadie's family again, I would consider the matter closed. But I also made it clear that I would be watching her behavior going forward, and that any future attempts to cause problems for us would result in immediate consequences. She agreed to my terms, but not gracefully. She spent another 20 minutes trying to justify her actions and claimed that she'd been motivated by love and concern rather than selfishness and entitlement. She said that someday, I'd understand that everything she'd done was to protect me from making mistakes that would hurt me in the long run. But she also made the calls. Right there in the coffee shop, she started contacting relatives to retract her statements about Sadie's family. She called Uncle Frederick and admitted that she'd exaggerated about my gambling habits and that Sadie's family had never actually done anything wrong. She called Cousin Stephen and said that she'd been stressed about money and had said things about Sadie that weren't true or fair. Each call was painful for her to make, and I could see how much she hated having to admit that she'd been lying. But she knew she didn't have a choice. I'd left her with no way out except complete capitulation. The final call she made was to Sadie's sister Piper. She apologized for contacting her with false information about me, admitted that she'd been lying about my character and behavior, and promised never to contact anyone in Sadie's family again. When she finished the calls, she looked at me with this expression of pure hatred. She said that I'd gotten what I wanted, that I'd humiliated her and forced her to destroy her own credibility with the family. She claimed that someday I'd regret choosing Sadie over my own mother. I told her that I hadn't chosen Sadie over her. I'd chosen honesty and respect over manipulation and lies. I said that if she'd been capable of treating Sadie with basic decency and accepting reasonable boundaries, none of this would have happened. She left without saying goodbye, but she's kept her word so far. She posted a public apology on social media, admitting that she'd made false statements about Sadie and her family due to personal stress and financial problems. Several relatives have told me that she called them to retract her lies and take responsibility for her behavior. More importantly, she hasn't made any attempts to contact Sadie's family or interfere with our relationships. The campaign of harassment has completely stopped. Sadie is relieved that it's finally over, though she's still processing everything that happened. Her family has been incredibly understanding about the whole situation, and they've made it clear that they don't hold my mother's behavior against me in any way. The best part is that my mother's credibility is completely shot now. Everyone in our family knows that she's willing to lie and manipulate to get what she wants. No one trusts her version of events anymore, and people are much more skeptical when she tries to create drama or play the victim. She's also facing real financial consequences for her behavior. Uncle Frederick is still demanding repayment of his loan, and other relatives are refusing to lend her money because they now know about her pattern of false emergency stories. She's going to have to deal with her gambling debts and financial problems on her own, without being able to manipulate family members into helping her. For those asking about the mysterious person she claimed had damaging information about Sadie's family, that turned out to be complete nonsense. She never had any real leverage or inside information. It was just another bluff in her desperate attempt to maintain control over the situation. Looking back, I'm glad I prepared for this confrontation instead of just hoping she'd eventually stop her behavior. She's the type of person who only responds to consequences, not reasoning or appeals to conscience. By documenting everything and building a complete case against her, I was able to force her to back down completely rather than just temporarily. The wedding incident that started all of this seems like it happened months ago. Even though it was only a week, my mother's attempt to destroy my marriage with lies and manipulation not only failed, but it ended up exposing her own character and behavior to everyone who matters. She gambled that she could manipulate and intimidate me into giving her what she wanted, just like she'd done when I was younger. But this time, I was prepared for her tactics, and I had my own leverage to use against her. Turns out that when you spend years planning for someone's inevitable betrayal, you can be ready with exactly the response they deserve.